now want to really hand over to Rachel, and I'll keep quiet for at least half an hour. Rachel, it's all yours. Please unmute.
There we go. I always try to do it by touching the little icon on your picture instead of doing it the right way. Anyway, I'll learn eventually. Okay, what I thought, when Dave first asked me, I said, can't we leave it till next week? Because things are just changing all the time. And I've got a feeling that the next week, from now till next Monday, we might, but then I think we'll get to next Monday and things will still be changing and I'll say, can I have another week? So let's do it now. Because it does sort of keep changing from day to day, although the bomb that the Tories threw in this week about illegality, I think took just about everybody by surprise, and we'll have a look at that later on. So what I want to run through today this evening is, what are the points of difficulty? Why are the Brexit negotiations kind of stuck? And then to have a look at, why have the Tories done what they've done? Why have they gone for illegality? And I want to have a look through the reasons that they might have done that, because on the face of it, it looks bonkers. And whatever I might think about this government, I think it's probably not as bonkers as it looks. There's probably a reason, and it's very difficult to work out what it is they think they're doing, other than just annoying us all. Okay. One of the points of contention, which Johnson addressed in his infamous Telegraph article, is what is in the withdrawal agreement that the government signed on, negotiated in November, and signed on our behalf after a Brexit election in January, having said, this is the best agreement since sliced bread. It's terrific, it's wonderful. And today they're saying, actually, it's not that good. And if you want to see that expressed better, have a look at Miliband, because he was perfect today, whatever he might have been any other day. Now, the withdrawal agreement is an international treaty, and it is registered as such. That means that everything in it has the status of international law. The political declaration at the end of it, however, is a declaration. So if you break the declaration, if you break what's in the declaration, you're breaching trust, but you're not necessarily illegal. The political declaration says robust commitments on a level playing field should ensure a future relationship based on open and fair competition. And it's this, we talked about this last time, a level playing field. What does that mean? This is the idea that the European Union doesn't want a competitor on its doorstep trying to undercut all its existing standards and compete with EU goods on a basis they regard as unfair by undercutting, undermining. So this means not lowering community standards, by which we mean the European community, on state aid, on competition, on social and economic standards, on environment and climate change, and on relevant tax matters. This is a declaration and arguably not legally enforceable, but our Prime Minister signed it on our behalf last January of this year, that is 8 months ago. So those are the sort of context of where the EU says that the British government is not respecting the commitments that it gave on the points that are to be negotiated during this period. That's the sort of overall look. When people talk about two things at the moment, one of them is fisheries. And this is, I'm certainly not an expert on fishing. But why has it become such a big deal? Why is this one of the things we talk about? Fisheries accounts for 0.04% of UK economic output. And that's 2018 figures from the Financial Times. Financial services, by comparison, amounted to 7.1% of national output. So you might think financial services are a little bit more important than fishing in terms of our national wealth. The way that the rules work at the moment is that all the seas are open to all the fishermen of all the seas belonging to all the countries of the European Union are open to all the fishermen of the European Union, and fisherwomen should there be any. The countries that have substantial interests in fishing within what the British will call British waters are France, Netherlands, Denmark and Ireland, who have a substantial share of the UK catch. So if the UK insists that our waters are ours only, then you put into difficulty those who depend on the fishing industry in those other countries. And that's why they're not willing to just say, okay, have it your own way, because it actually is a problem for 4 of the other member states. There is also a difference between who catches the fish and which fish are caught, and where those fish are turned into fish fingers, where the fish are processed and where the catch is sold. So the people who process fish and the places where that is located is actually different from where the fish is caught. Some of our catch isn't sold in the UK. It's sold, for example, the big langoustines that are fished, the big scampies that are fished in Scotland. And a lot of the seafood from Scotland goes directly to Spain at the present time, because us Brits don't eat this stuff. It goes to Spain, they love it. So there's also a question of the market for the fish. So it's quite a complex area in which there are a lot of people with interests. So it's one that's going to be actually particularly difficult to sort out. And the EU is insisting that it is sorted out at the same time as everything else. Okay, we've done fish now, we can put fish on one side if that's not the wrong thing to do with fish. But just be aware that that's actually likely to be more of a sticking point than any of us might imagine. The real sticking point, again, is Northern Ireland. With the withdrawal agreement, there is a protocol which is part of the withdrawal agreement, and therefore it's legally enforceable. It's part of the treaty. Theresa May's deal, in effect, put the boundary between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland between the 2 states, and then went to there was a lot of shenanigans, you remember the fallback and all the rest of it, about what do you then do in order not to have to put customs posts along that border. Nobody wants to put customs posts on the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, partly because it's almost impossible geographically, and partly because it seriously undercuts the Good Friday Agreement. There is always going to be a customs border, a tariff border, if you like, between the market, those who are in, and those who are out. Once we're out, there will be a border. Whatever Boris says, there will be a customs border around what will then be the edges of the European Union. I think we perhaps all need to write this down somewhere, because Boris keeps denying it, and so does the rest. I'm going to call him Johnson, not Boris. He's not a mate. He keeps denying it, and so do his colleagues. But there will be a customs border around the edges of the market, because that is what a market is. So by definition, in effect, if you don't put the customs border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, there is only one place left to put it, and that is the Irish Sea. There will be a customs border in the Irish Sea, and there was always going to be from the moment that that declaration was signed, whatever Boris says, Johnson. And it's actually clear as mud. To say now that he didn't realise that it was going to be like that is utterly dishonest, because it is stated in words of just about 1 syllable in the withdrawal agreement. It is evident. There is a slight way of thinking about it, where you need to think about goods travelling from the UK into Northern Ireland and goods travelling from Northern Ireland into the UK. For goods that are travelling from the UK into Northern Ireland, given that there is now no border, customs or otherwise, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, that means that all goods that pass from the UK or originate in Northern Ireland must be in conformity with European Union rules and standards, because they can move directly into the EU, into into Ireland, and then straight across the sea to France, and then through France to the rest of the EU. So there always had to be and has to be. Again, this is the sort of the rules of a market. I'm not saying, well, I think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. This is what a market is. So any goods that originate in or travel through from the rest of from Great Britain into Northern Ireland will be, and always were going to be, subject to EU checks, both on tariffs and on the quality and eligibility of that produce, because it's going to go directly into the European Union market. So this is actually explicit in the protocol. If, in effect, Northern Ireland is effectively in the EU, although it's also in the UK's customs territory, so that when the UK makes customs agreements with other nation states like Japan, Northern Ireland will be included. So that's what it means by being in the customs territory of the UK. Other than that, it is directly within the single market of the European Union. This, if you like, was a fudge. I mean, it's a workable fudge if you put your head around it, but it was the only way really of more or less satisfying the Brexiteers while maintaining the integrity of the market. This means that the Northern Ireland will remain aligned to, and I'm quoting from the protocol, remain aligned to a limited set of EU rules on VAT and excise duty, on phytosanitary rules about the sanitary quality of the products, on product requirements, and on state aid rules. Suddenly, state aid rules, which is directly applicable in Northern Ireland because of it being part of the internal market, becomes a major issue. And that's one of the ones that the new Johnson piece of legislation is aimed at. That is the bit that they want to get rid of. So these really are the parts. I mean, fisheries is minor. Some, fudge will be found on fish, but although nobody quite sees how at the moment. But this is the one that the Tories have suddenly blown up the whole discussions about. They've been stuck on these points for a long time. But the introduction of the recent legislation or proposed legislation into the House of Commons has in effect changed the discussion. Is that what it was meant to do? It's upset an enormous number of people. It's upset not just people, but governments and people that we depend on. The Irish at the moment, the US Congress at the moment are saying there will be no trade deal with Britain if the Good Friday Agreement is undermined by this legislation. It won't go through the Senate. It won't go through the House of Republicans, House of whatever they are. So why have the Tories done what they've done? Why have they thrown this bomb into negotiations? And why have they upset 4 of their own previous prime ministers, plus one of ours, plus most of the heads of state of Europe, plus etc., plus us? So when you're asking yourself, well, why have they done this? Johnson says it's because they didn't realise that this was the consequences of the act that they signed. I'm saying that's dishonest. If they didn't realise at the time, they must have been absolutely and totally stupid. And whatever I might think of the government, I actually think their advisors are probably not utterly and totally stupid. There are some very decent civil servants out there who understand this stuff and will have told them. Apart from it being written down in words of one syllable that a 5-year-old could probably understand. Secondly, so then, that's sort of a background. The first really big idea about why they did this is it's a genuine screw up. That when they rushed the bill through the House of Commons, which they did, they only allowed 3 days scrutiny, if you remember. The whole thing was absolutely rushed through at breakneck speed to get Brexit done. That some things were overlooked. I don't think that can be right. I think some things were hidden from view, but I suspect that they weren't overlooked. But in the rush to get it over the line, just maybe. Second possibility. At the present time, things are not going really well for the Tories in the negotiation, for the British government in the negotiation. Things are not advancing. We're moving to a hard Brexit. we might or might not think they want one, but certainly industry doesn't. Finance doesn't. Most of their backers actually don't, although some big finance do, they bet against it and so on. But by and large, the people who make the money for this country don't want a hard Brexit. And at the moment, that's where we're going. So it's possible the idea of this piece of legislation was actually to throw a bomb into the negotiations, because they're stuck, to just chuck it in to try and unstick things. It's what's sometimes referred to as their chaos theory, although it has absolutely nothing to do with chaos theory. But you can see in the writings of people like Naomi Klein, the idea that disrupting things like this allows capital and big business to make advances that they otherwise couldn't. So what you do is you create chaos, and while the chaos is going on, the people who've created it get what they want. While everybody's looking over here, it's like a conjuring trick. They get on with what they really want while we're all looking over there and responding to the chaos. That's possible. It's a bomb. It's going to put pressure on the heads of government. It creates chaos. It creates some space for some movement. Maybe. 3, things are not going well for the Tories in terms of either their national standings. The poll figures aren't what they used to be. In particular, Johnson's poll figures aren't what they used to was. So go for a culture war. Let's have a culture war instead of having a discussion about the economics, about the realities of life and blah. Let's go for a culture war. Let's do the patriotic thing. We're throwing everything we can to protect the interests of the UK and the British. We're going all out to protect Britain, to protect British interests, to defend ourselves from these dreadful Europeans. And anybody who disagrees with this is not patriotic. So that's culture wars, isn't it? So that's one way of covering the mess, by giving it a lovely varnish of patriotism and engagement in defence of our terrific and wonderful realm. It's possible that one of the reasons that they've done this is because they're still worried about being outflanked on the right by Farage and the European Reform Group. So if they make a compromise deal, which in the end all deals are compromises, but if and when a compromise deal is made, somebody will have to give up something to get a deal. Then immediately the right wing of Faragists and the rest of them will howl that they've been betrayed, that this is not really Brexit, it's Brexit in name only, and all the rest of that kind of sloganising. And there'll be a huge attack on the Tories from the right, which puts them in some difficulty in the rather far off election that we all want to happen sooner than that. So there could be an issue there. Also, they could be just winding up to say, well, if they're finally forced to compromise, they'll be able to say, we did everything we possibly could, and we would have done this rule, but we were stopped from doing it by nasty Brexit, nasty Remainers, by Remainer lawyers, which is what they want to paint Starmer as. You want to paint him as a nasty Remainer lawyer that's not patriotic, who's just loyally, and they're not altogether wrong, but that's the picture of him that they want to get into the heads of people, that he's just boring, he's a Remainer, and he's being unhelpful, and he's just being a lawyer. He's dealing reasonably well with that at the moment. Anyway, there is said to be a Twitter statement from Cummins going back to early this year, when he says, don't worry about the alleged permanent commitments. They're not permanent. In other words, you may think, and I may think, that the Tories never actually meant to carry through this agreement when they made it. It got them their prize. They got their withdrawal deal. They swallowed the bits that are pretty much unswallowable, in fact, for the Tories, with the direct intention of never, ever actually putting them into effect, that they would somehow wriggle out of them or break them later. I think that's quite credible. These are not people whose word is their bond. And as a strategy for them to get Brexit done, it makes sense. So you can argue they never actually meant that their word would be their bond. They would change it later because, you know, there's some of the deal we don't like. And you can hear some of that in the language at the present time. At the moment, Johnson and his mates are saying, well, they want to defend the Good Friday Agreement and that their new bill will defend the Good Friday Agreement. This is absolute rubbish. Their new bill does the opposite. You need only to look at the words of any Irish politician worth their salt at the present time to get an extremely clear perspective on that. Both the Prime Minister of Ireland and the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland have both expressed themselves with typical Irish clarity about what does and does not defend the Good Friday Agreement, and so has Nancy Pelosi. It does not do anything about the Good Friday Agreement except create rubbish. It doesn't help, it doesn't defend it, and the existing situation doesn't threaten it because it was worked out specifically not to do so. You might ask why, and I might certainly have, why are state aid rules suddenly so important? Why are the Tories, who ever since Thatcher have gone on about how dreadful state aid is, how it's a left-wing plot, how it's socialism on the quiet, state aid, getting the state to help out industry, is only a way of keeping inefficient industries going when they should be allowed to just die. And if you look back at Thatcher's industrial policy, when you're looking at quite a policy that was influenced by quite almost pure forms of monetarism, industries were thrown onto the scrap heap and phoenixes of new industries were supposed to arise from those ashes, financed in general by capital, by industrial capital. So according to Thatcher, the industrial capitalists would throw their money in to create new industries, they would make profits, and everything would be okay, we'd have new industries. It didn't happen because, funnily enough, it turned out that the big industrial capitalists are much more interested in short-term profit and in providing profit for shareholders and in buying back shares and so on in order to enrich the holders of wealth further than they are in being the agents of risky startups. So in effect, you can say that that way of improving our very poor industry failed. And trying it some more hasn't helped. So if you can't rely on capital to bring forth new, valuable, profitable industry, what's left? The state. So if you need an agent, and remember that Johnson & Co have actually promised to level up and to invest in the red wall and to invest in the north and to, I forget the rest of the promises, you know them all, don't you? I mean, we were all there together, you know what they promised to do. So if they're going to do any of it, they've got to find a way to get some finance into starting up industries which will be quite risky and may well fail. But we're looking at new tech, AI, comms, communications, new communications forms of computer-aided design, computer-aided production. And if you think about it, they've recently bought this bizarre satellite called OneWeb, which, as far as anybody can see, was about to go into receivership before we threw an awful lot of money at it, and probably can't do what they want it to do, or what they say they want it to do. But nonetheless, they've bought it. So you're looking at, and they bought it with state money. So you're looking at an example of state investment, which is not really state aid in the direct ways, but we can argue that one out. Today, a company called ARM, which makes electronic bits, has been more or less bought by one of the big American chip makers, I think. Are they going to save it? Are they going to save it from being bought by foreigners, or is American foreigners okay? So I think if you look at, and there are bits you can dig out. I mean, it's always difficult because you can dig out bits of information that say, yes, this is Cummings' idea, this is he and his pals and the current thoughts of the government, if they have such a thing as a thought. This is the direction in which they want to go, which is to use state capital to promote the development of new industries. Sounds a little bit like the Green New Deal in a way, but we would do it so much better. And that's actually what we should do. But the way that the Tories want to do it is not the way we want to do it. The way the Tories want to do it is by engaging in this bill that they're putting forward, which of course I've forgotten the name of it right now. It looks as though the government is overriding the power, not only of Brexit, overriding the power of regional and national, the other nations, to promote investment themselves, and wants to centralise it, and wants to drive everything from the centre. In other words, to not use local knowledge, to not use the local state, but to drive everything from their own little clique at the centre and through government. That may well not work, apart from being a stupid idea. Too big, too distant, not well planted into the community, imposed on people, upsetting Scotland, upsetting Wales, upsetting Northern Ireland, although I'm not quite sure that we care about any of the above, but could push towards the breakup of the United Kingdom by taking away, apparently, powers that the national governments believe themselves to have, and certainly not using the dynamism that regions and local authorities have, but bringing it all down to the centre by trying to drive from the centre by looking at industrial policy that is run from Westminster. And I think we all have some ideas at the present time about how well being run from Westminster is currently going. I think that's all I want to say. I've packed enough in, I think. Will that do for now?